Welcome to Natural 2. This week's episode is part 2 of our unscripted discussion of the One D&D announcement and the first playtest packet. So don't forget to watch the previous episode if you haven't already to get all of our One D&D impressions and discussion. So this week we're going to cover the announcement itself, I think, and our impressions of the tack that Wizards is taking here out of the gate. Why don't you? Sounds like you've got some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't know if you're aware, but D&D apparently is going to die and the world is going to end. There's been a lot of community uproar and some speculation and lots of different conversations happening on the web space that made me sound so old, but I'll take that.
It's not the first time D&D was gonna die.
I think overall, what I guess, start this with is I imagine that D&D players from back in the 80s or the 90s or however long you've been playing D&D have had this exact conversation or had this exact mentality like, oh, these new fandangled children, they don't even use, whatever, and these new rules and all this stuff. So I think we're having a little bit of that where people that enjoy the game that they have kind of like centered their concept of D&D around is changing and they are not ready for that. And the general answer to those fears is 5e's not going anywhere. Like nothing is going to prevent you from playing 5e in the future because I'm sure there are still groups that play the older editions of D&D that they like and they didn't upgrade because they didn't want to. But there is a conversation, or I guess a little discussion to have about the direction that Wizard of the Coast is taking, some of the problems that might cause, and not for like us or individuals, but just kind of as like the tabletop role-playing sphere as a whole, because D&D is like such an influential game in this space. So that I think is a more interesting discussion than the oh, they're gonna ruin D&D forever, because I think that's a little bit obnoxious.
I would tend to agree. The two things that I would add to that before we move on is that number one, this has absolutely happened before. What is that from? This has all happened before. This will all happen again.
Oh,
BioShock or anyway, doesn't matter. I just like making references. No, this has definitely happened before. I can remember fourth edition coming out, being announced, and I think there was a better argument at that time for why D&D was dead, given how radical the changes were. And I'm not interested in turning this into a critique of fourth edition. That's a whole other conversation that's probably not even worth having. I can remember a lot of those same sounds being made at that time, and now here we are years later, and D&D is bigger than ever. Uh, Having said that, there's a part of it that I understand. There's a part of it that I get. 5e isn't going anywhere. The books aren't going to vanish when One D&D comes out. But I get it. I get that sense of wanting to be on the cusp, wanting to be playing the latest, or wanting to be enjoying the most recent update or rules revisions, and that sense that like one of the reasons I like D&D specifically, one of the reasons I play D&D, I've played a handful of other systems as well, and I came back to D&D for 5th edition, is it can be nice. It can be nice when the thing that you're doing is what most everybody else is also doing. There's an economy of scale. You can
Mhm.
go on Kickstarter and find projects for 5e, unending. To say nothing of the official content coming out. Like there's something exciting and fun about being current. So I sort of understand that frustration of like, yeah, we could still keep playing 5e, but now we're playing the old system. And it's not 100% rational, but that part at least I sort of get. That you want to be playing with the latest toy for a variety of reasons, some good, some bad. But anyway, um, just wanted to throw that in there.
I think that this is probably a pretty decent place to slip in their claims of backwards compatibility, because that is what a lot of this conversation kind of boils down to, is I guess the side or the party or the group that say, oh, because it's backwards compatible, this, that, and the other thing, it's gonna like blur lines and things of that nature, which I can certainly understand. And the other group that's like, oh, they're claiming it's backwards compatible, it's not going to be, which I think is probably true. Because we're discussing more of like the announcement and their wording and speculating a bit, I will certainly put a little disclaimer here that none of this is set in stone. None of this has been like guaranteed, but the general attitude that we've been seeing gives me a little bit of confidence in saying the things that I'm going to say, but they could certainly change. They are doing this whole like, this is the last D&D, this is the D&D to rule them all, like, you know, we're, I don't think so. I think that that's a bunch of crap. I think it's more of just like maybe a marketing ploy or just an attempt to appeal to people or not eliminate the 5e market yet because they're still relying on it for business. It is not backwards compatible or not a new edition when you are changing the rules and re-releasing the core rule books. Like, I cannot figure out how you say that sentence and then claim, oh, but it's not a new edition. It's like, then what are additions if not changes to the rules? It's very confusing, and I think that's causing probably more issues with this go around than previous editions. Because at least previously, they're like, here's the next edition we're working on. Where in this one, they're like, here's the next edition we're working on, but it's not a new edition. It's very strange.
I find it a little odd for them to call out backward compatibility specifically this time around because the only thing that they have stated with any kind of official weight, unless I'm mistaken, if I am, comment down below, is that published adventures for 5e will be able to be played using One D&D. And that's a weird thing for them to call out and a weird thing for them to refer to as backward compatibility. Because
Mm-hmm.
here's the thing. I have adapted and run adventures from the 80s
Mm-hmm.
in 5e. I have run adventures that were made by third parties that were rules agnostic in 5e. Every adventure everywhere is backward compatible with the latest version of D&D if you're willing to do a little bit of work. So that strikes me as odd. Like, what does that even mean in this context when you stop and think about it? Because all adventures are backward compatible. What I want to know, and what I think most people want to know, is are any of the rules or mechanics or classes backward compatible?
Mm-hmm. Or I think in the
Um,
last video you even said, would it be forward compatible?
or
Because
yeah,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
the semantics words.
Mm-hmm.
Can you play a fifth edition warlock in One D&D without a bunch of problems or
Mm-hmm.
without being underpowered or
Mm-hmm.
overpowered at the table? Like that's what I'm more interested in, and that to me would be the proof of their claim that it's not a new edition. If you can straight up bring classes out of the 5e player's handbook to your One D&D game, then yeah, okay, that's now you've got my attention with these claims of backward compatibility and that it's not a full new revision. But the adventures being backward compatible is almost a meaningless thing to say.
What I think they're trying to claim there, which I immediately think is just absolutely wrong, is that you can just take the exact adventure, drop it into one D&D, and then play it without any sort of adjustments or stats or anything of that nature, which I don't think is going to work, specifically because with the playtest material that they've released, there are literally new things. There are new conditions, there are new rules, there are new terminologies. The creatures aren't supposed to crit anymore, which drastically sways power levels. Like, there is absolutely no way that you can just take a 5e adventure, run it straight, and have the same level of challenge and experience that you've already had. And I don't think that's the end of the world. I think maybe the claim they should have made is you can run a 5e adventure in this, but some adjustments need to be made, as in any adventure that is not specifically tailored to that edition. So I think overall, the whole point of this, and the internet has pointed this out 1,000 times over, is they still want to ride the 5e market that they are making their money off of, because that's basically all of Wizards of the Coast right now is 5e, and they just released new material for it like the week before they announced One D&D. So they are trying to make sure people still buy 5e, but also start getting people excited for the next edition, or whatever they're going to end up calling this. And that is really, it rubs me the wrong way, and I don't see a way that that isn't at least partially true. So that's really frustrating, at least on my part.
Yeah, that's forget the adventures. I want to know, does any of my copy of Xanathar's still apply? Does any of my copy of Tasha's still apply? Or Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse? Like, is uh, Monsters of the Multiverse also just came out?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it'll be 2 or 3 years old by the time One D&D comes out, but still, like, you're absolutely right. Once you say we're working on the new thing,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to make a case for why you should continue to buy into the old thing.
I mean, it's like putting your 2 weeks in at work. Like, once you know you're out, it's hard to put forth your best effort. Like, you now understand the level of commitment that you have to this. So yeah, it's a problem. I think so. Besides that being a somewhat schemy thing, the actual impact on the game or the community that I think that might be overall negative is if they do not separate this clearly into a new edition, or somehow come up with a really efficient way of modularization, that's not a word, but breaking all the components down into a, I guess, easily digestible way. Starting a game or running a new D&D game is gonna be obnoxious, because you say, oh, let's say, you put a post out, I'm looking for people, I'm running Lost Mines of Phandelver, let's have fun, let's go at it. And someone's like, oh, what extra books are you using? And you're like, oh, whatever material you want. Like, oh, well, can we also bring One D&D characters? And it's like, oh, I haven't done that yet, I was kind of looking to play 5e. Oh, but it's 5e compatible, don't worry about it. And then they bring this thing that's like completely new to you or completely different, but because the company has claimed that it's compatible, you now have this like strange gray area. And I already find it super obnoxious, because I've been trying to apply to games recently, where it's like, here's the books that I will allow, and here's the books that I don't, and here's the feats that I don't allow, and here's the classes that I don't allow. And it's like, it's really, it's a chore. It's a huge chore to shift through all this material, and just adding more onto 5e, which is already bloated with material, is going to be even more obnoxious. And I think that's a downside of them not pulling the trigger on making a clear separation.
I don't even want to think about what it would be like, especially until we get more information. But I don't want to think about what it would be like to try to be at a table where if they really plant their flag on this backward compatible claim, to be at a table with a 5e ranger and a One D&D ranger, which if they don't make changes to the ranger for One D&D, why are they even doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Or similar, like the same class but from both players' handbooks. Like, what do you guys really mean when you say
Mhm.
backward compatibility? What are you talking about?
Mhm.
Uh, and if it's just the adventures from 5e, I'd go so far as to say that you guys are being misleading. That's not actually backward compatibility. That's just, you know, status quo, really.
Mhm.
Uh, but
So
anyway,
the the part of all this conversation that I found the most fascinating and also kind of like, I guess, upset me or stimulated me the most was watching that initial trailer. I think it's like 3 to 5 minutes, something like that. And it is so overly done and so like self-indulgent and dramatic. I imagine you've seen the trailer, right? Like the actual announcement, where it's like, oh, we've crafted 5e with the community, and we're now ready to prepare for the next adventure with this family that we've grown. And oh, I hate that stuff. I hate that stuff so much. These shots of like these old character sheets and these miniatures and stuff, and these like it was so hard to watch. And I think they are relying so heavily on this like we're doing this for the community. This is going to be the best edition for everyone, and everyone's going to have a say and all this stuff. And it was just there was not a lot of information. There was nothing like clear and precise about it. It was just these words. These words don't mean anything. And it was incredibly frustrating to watch. And then I think this would be a way to segue into their announcement of the virtual tabletop or whatever that ends up being. I am I enjoy some aspects of it, but I am overall hesitant to be excited for it. I don't know what your feelings are on that.
I'm I'm agnostic about it. I'm not excited about it, but I also feel like it's a no-brainer. I feel like it's of course they would do that. Why wouldn't they? They're leaving money on the table by not doing that. They were supposed to have done it for 4th edition, if I remember correctly. And it did not come together for whatever reason. So it's a little strange that it took them 2 more editions or revisions or whatever you want to call it to come back to the idea. But I'm simply interested to see how it goes, what it looks like, what the integration with Beyond is like. Think that it has to be highly modular. If they lock it down too tight to the stuff that's in Beyond, I I am much less interested, and now actively like prepared to avoid it because you gotta be able to put your own stuff in there, make your edits, do your homebrew creatures and items, and to do it easily. That's the number one thing that I want from a VTT is how hard do I got to work to make this look like I want it to look,
Hmm.
to have the things in it that I care about. So the integration with D&D Beyond is fine, but it's almost secondary. This thing needs to be a slick, sharp, intuitive tabletop, and they've got their work cut out for them because they're behind the curve on that. There are some really slick, impressive passion projects out there already for VTTs. I'm not gonna name drop any, um, but the offerings are strong.
Hmm.
So if they release something and its only selling point is that D&D Beyond plugs into it directly and seamlessly, that's yeah, whatever. Uh, it better be free if that's the case.
I think that it is obviously like the best business decision because of the whole COVID thing and how D&D's become way more virtual and like how insanely large that market now is. If that is the driving force behind it, I'm really afraid. Like if it is all business, and which obviously like I'm not so innocent or so pure that it's like, oh, they have to do it for the community and it has to be free. And like, I understand they have to make their money, and I'm totally cool with that. Like the general relationship you should have with Wizards of the Coast is, I am willing to pay you X money because you provide X service, and this is a situation I am happy with. I am afraid that we might get to the point where the microtransaction conversation has popped up a bunch, where like, we're going to get this, and now every hat or miniature or dungeon room or effect or whatever is going to be this or that, and then people are going to be unwilling to switch like virtual tabletop systems or programs because now they're invested in this D&D thing and they have money in it. And there's a lot of stuff that comes up from this that I don't think that Wizard of the Coast is ready to handle correctly, because this is going to be their first go into it, and it seems like they're going into it like full bore, and I think they're going to probably fumble it ever so slightly. The other issue that I could see coming up, and this is generally like my version of, oh, these damn kids don't understand back in the day, I am moderately concerned that D&D is becoming more video gamey. I think that term has been used, that conversation has been coming up quite a bit. But I mean, it has, and that's not ultimately a bad thing. You know, you have to modernize, you have to change, adapt to, you know, what people do nowadays, what this generation is used to, and having it more video gamey makes it more approachable, brings more people to the hobby, you know, all that fun stuff. But there is something to be said. I've tried using 3D virtual tabletops in the past. I've tried setting up maps for them. I've considered trying to run them. I've bought a few of them to mess around with it. And of course, this is all somewhat subjective, but it is difficult to create the scenery or the vibe or the scenario that you have in your head, or to describe it accurately when the other person is staring at a 3D model. They are presented with this like world that they are immediately interacting with before you are allowed to take effect to that. And so I'm curious and hesitant that if people get used to playing D&D in this 3D environment that D&D provides as like official tool, and that's like new players' initial showcase into the hobby, it might squash creativity to an extent. That the player has more to mull over and engage with, and has to do the extra step of creating the scenery in their head so it's more present in their mind versus staring at something. And I don't know if everyone will agree with me, but I am somewhat iffy on that.
The idea that the more detailed your battle map is, the harder it is to get players to uh, conceive or understand the details that aren't represented by that map. I could see that being a concern for sure. And we've we've got a lot more to learn from the playtest releases, because the thing that people overwhelmingly disliked about fourth edition was that it was strongly, arguably, debatably, what have you,
Mm-hmm.
but strongly video gamey, influenced by that. And 5e was a step away. Like they were distancing themselves from that idea. So there's it'll be interesting to see if they make the same, let's say, mistakes again this time around, especially if they're bringing this VTT idea back. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only reason, like, if they announced the VTT as like a side note at the end of the trailer, I would be less concerned. But it was a pretty big part of the overall announcement, and they clearly made a point of announcing it with the announcement of One D&D. It's not like they announced One D&D as this like separate thing that they're working on, and then, hey, also we are now building our own virtual tabletop. It is, we are building One D&D with a virtual tabletop. And I am, my speculation, again, none of this has been actually confirmed or announced or has been spoken to by the company by any regards, but I am curious if they are going to tailor their design or their marketing or their approach to One D&D through the virtual tabletop lens or through digital content lens, right? Like they're going to put, marketing material or advertisements on their books. So even if you are playing in person, you are now being splattered with, flyers and stickers and, extra add-ons or a new hat or whatever for the virtual tabletop, like trying to bring people into it. I wouldn't be surprised either if they turn D&D Beyond into somewhat of a like group finder or a community thing or like a Roll20 kind of replacement, because if you can bring all of that traffic to your website and have everybody's group inside the D&D sphere, inside the Wizard of the Coast sphere, why wouldn't you?
I guess Beyond already sells skins for the 3D dice.
Mm-hmm.
And now that you bring this up, that's a pretty bad sign.
That's what
Uh,
everyone's been pointing to is like kind of the evidence of this idea.
and the mentality that they're approaching this with, there's a light side and a dark side way for them to handle this, and the the pull for any corporation is strong towards the dark side. So there's a lot to keep an eye on.
Come to the dark side. Ah, ah, ah. I think we're ultimately going to get a gray. Like, I don't think it's going to be all negative. I don't think it's going to be all positive. We're going to get a mixture. And I just hope that that mixture is a light gray and not a dark gray.
The way things stand right now, I have zero plan of switching to the official VTT. I've got one that I'm a pretty big fan of that has huge modularity and that has been in development for years.
Mm-hmm.
So at a best case scenario, their initial release will be behind in terms of features. So I will definitely not be an early adopter, and maybe a never adopter. We'll see.
That's what I said at the beginning is like, this ultimately doesn't matter to me at all. Like, they could release a tabletop and it could be garbage. They could release One D&D and it could be broken and ridiculous. I'm still going to be playing my game. It does not matter to me. The reason that I like even think it's worth talking about this stuff and why I think actually having a discourse about it is important is Wizards of the Coast is in charge of bringing new people to the hobby. They are basically in charge of how tabletop role playing is seen as a whole throughout society, which is kind of a big weight that they have to throw around. And so if, and this is a big if their sole purpose or their sole goal is to just incorporate as many players into this more video game environment and barely even pull them into actual like D&D or tabletop role playing, like if they remove the, I guess, idea of playing in person almost entirely, and now D&D is just this like MMORPG where you hop from one campaign to the other, I think that's probably an overall negative for the community. I think that would squish and remove a lot of the cool stuff that we enjoy and that we like, I guess, cherish as a giant group. And that's a little bit broad, but that is my like fear and why I talk about this is if we don't handle new players correctly, it could have really bad long lasting issues, right? Like if we have another 4E, that basically just killed D&D for a huge stint. Like I hear so many people who are like, I just stopped playing D&D when 4th edition was out. There's a lot of people, like new people that tried to play 4E and then did not engage. And so that is my, I guess, hope is that we don't have another one of those and that maybe speaking out as a community or speaking with our dollars, as a lot of people like to say, will help keep us on the right track, whatever that may be.
Well, that was me. I did not play D&D during 4th edition.
Mm-hmm.
I did play 4th edition so that I, at least knew what it was about. But I did not have a regular game in 4E. I played other systems that entire time. And actually 5E was out for a while before I picked it up and realized, hey, this is what I like again. So they have a lot of responsibility and a lot of pitfalls as the flagship
Mm-hmm.
of the hobby. And this is a good time, I think, to mention that by the time you're watching this, the survey for the first playtest packet is available. If you care at all about any of this, and you must if you're watching us right now, take the survey, fill it out. I can tell you from some small amount of personal experience that the companies pay attention to the responses to these things. It's not just a token effort so that they can say that they got the community involved. Take the survey, answer the questions, tell them what you like and hate. It's your only chance other than swearing off of the product and moving to a different product to influence what is being made.
Yeah, I don't see a reason not to fill it out. Like, if you have some objection to like what path they're taking, you should still fill out the survey. You're not providing them any sort of benefit by not. So even if you are staunchly against the new direction of Wizards of the Coast, it is still worthwhile to throw your opinion in there. It literally does not hurt. And it probably, I don't know what the survey is going to end up looking like, but I don't imagine it will take more than like 5 minutes. I think that would be pushing it. So.
There's a saying in a different realm that if you didn't vote, you don't have any right to complain.
Mm-hmm.
That's reductive and simplistic, but it's kind of true.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna keep complaining, especially, then why aren't you
Mm-hmm.
voting and
Yeah.
filling out the survey?
Yeah. So make sure to do that. It should have come out yesterday when this video released, or if you're watching this at any other point, it probably is out, or maybe new playtest material is out. So whatever engagement or feedback you can give, certainly do so if you care about the hobby or you enjoy the hobby.
That's the public service announcement brought to you by Natural 2.
Mhm. Well, to bring this to a close, disclaimer, play whatever D&D you want. Don't listen to us. Have fun. Hopefully the conversation spurred some thoughts or conversations of your own, and everybody fill out the survey and attempt to interact with One D&D as much as possible so that we can craft the perfect community D&D game for generations to come.
It's the last edition.
Jesus
It's
Christ.
gonna be so perfect that they never have to make another one.
We gotta
So
end. I'm gonna start ranting again.
you could say you were there and that you left your mark on it.
But until next time, everybody.